Welcome back to another episode of Independent Thought. My name is Desmond Price. And for today's episode, I am joined by Municipal Judge candidate Jacob Coolidge, who's running out of Department 3 here in Missoula. Jacob, thank you for coming on the podcast today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I told a lot of people in my audience, I'm very big into enhancing, local politics, and Missoula is my local politics. So I'm glad to have you come on today and talk about this election. So you are running for a municipal judge seat here in our city. I just wanted to ask you a couple questions about, your background before we get into where you stand on how you believe judges should be operating in our community. So first and foremost, I just want to ask, what led you to decide to run for this office? Like what was the moment that led up to this decision to make this run?
Sure, totally. So I'll start by saying that I'm currently a public defender, and I represent people who are charged with felonies that are at or below the poverty line. So that's who I am right now. But who I was kind of before that is that I was a criminology and sociology professor at the university. I got my master's degree here, focusing on inequality in the justice system. And then I taught upper level criminology classes, but all of my research and all of my kind of passion was about researching local criminal justice systems. And it was always geared towards reform and always geared towards kind of making them better. After I did that for a while, I wanted to get kind of more engaged with the criminal justice system rather than kind of analyze it from the sidelines, which is what I kind of felt like after a while I was doing at the university. And so I went to law school to be a public defender. I took a brief detour before I actually became a public defender after law school, when I continued to teach and ran a interdisciplinary criminal justice research and reform initiative out of the law school. But so that kind of brings me to where I am now. The reason that I decided to run for this race isn't because I've had some long desire or long held goal to be a judge. It was just more of an opportunity driven thing. And so I think it bears mention of what the court has changed, how the court has changed, and what this election, why it's so unique, is that previously it was one elected judge who then hired her own either assistant or sub judges who basically helped shoulder the load because it was too much of a caseload for one judge to take on. And the citizens would only elect that one individual judge, and then she would make those individual decisions about who she was hiring and who were hearing the cases. That judge, Judge Jenks, is now retiring. And on the heels of that decision, the city council expanded it to 3 departments, and the legislature passed a bill requiring that they all be elected. And so the reason that's important to note is because now all of a sudden Missoulians are voting in these 3 departments for the first time, which is a large part of why I decided to run. So my former boss, Jennifer Striano, was the first to announce that she was running in Department 1 for municipal court judge. And she's a very respected colleague of mine. She hired me. She was my boss for years. And then in Department 2, my other colleague, Eli Parker, decided to run. And he's got extensive experience in the mental health field here in the state. And so I really respect and appreciate him too, and kind of how he brings this different approach to the practice of law that's really focused on mental health treatment and community integration into mental health courts. And so I saw an opportunity with those 2 and this Department 3 position, where the person who was running that court I practiced in front of, and I did not feel was well equipped for the position based on things I had seen him do from the bench. So I saw an opportunity to kind of enact immediate criminal justice reform and implement evidence-based practices at a local level, which is something that I've always been passionate about doing, is fixing these local criminal justice systems, because the American criminal justice system as a whole is so in need of reform. But obviously it's such a decentralized system that most of it happens at the local level. So I saw this opportunity to kind of bring my skills, my academic legal background to the table. And I thought it made sense to kind of talk to Eli and Jen about running together. And Jennifer was super enthusiastic about it, and so was Eli. So the 3 of us kind of decided to embark on this and run together as kind of a unified team that has a shared vision of what municipal court should be. And so that's kind of what motivated me to run, is because I saw this opportunity. And I knew that the other 3 people who were running opposing that idea were people that Judge Jenks had hired. So really it was kind of the opportunity and the timing in this unique election that really motivated me to make the decision to run.
Absolutely. And so I want to get into a little bit later about, what it is that you think needs to be changed on the court level. But before we go there, I kind of want to just come back a little bit to your public defender service. I think it's admirable to be a public defender. I know that it's more or less a thankless job in a lot of ways. Can you just briefly tell me how that experience has shaped you, and maybe also touch on how maybe what you thought of as far as like the term criminality has changed over your time being a public defender?
Sure, absolutely. So, I mean, being a public defender, it's thankless. I love the work because it's really ground level, helping people work, and it really is kind of the front lines of the criminal justice system. Um, it's overwhelming work. I've got over 100 felony cases right now, ranging from drug possession all the way up to homicide. So the volume that we experience is tremendous, but that also has a way of consolidating kind of experience in the criminal justice system over a period of time. I mean, in my 4 years as a public defender, I have no idea how many cases I've handled, but I've dealt with a ton of people who have been involved in the criminal justice system. Some people over and over and over and over, some people their first and only time, and kind of everything in between. One thing that's really kind of shown me is that I studied a lot about the causes of crime and criminality and criminal behavior and penological policy and policing. I studied this stuff. But when you're a public defender, you see it in action and you see it actually going on, and you can see people experiencing these things, which is kind of a more intimate experience and intimate knowledge than studying it perhaps at a systemic level or at an academic level. So we really got to see kind of how crime in a community operates, our responses to crime, how local criminal justice systems operate in a really more kind of profound and significant level. Obviously, I've been representing folks for a while now in district court on felonies, but I cut my teeth in municipal court. So I really saw kind of upfront how the municipal court operates. In terms of kind of criminality, it's been interesting because we've talked a lot about criminality when I taught, it's this kind of definition of how people define kind of criminal behavior or crime. But criminality is interesting because in an academic sense, right, it's a label for non-desirable behavior or people that oftentimes the legislature or kind of the people in power are able to dictate or define what kind of behaviors lie outside of that norm. And similarly, we see the same thing of like, however the legislature describes what is criminal, those who do it, that is criminality. And so criminality is kind of the behavior or the unwanted behavior, as defined by our government or systems of power. And what we see is that term criminality is kind of can be defined kind of broadly and be disproportionately applied to people who are experiencing certain aspects of life. So for instance, like addiction is largely criminalized because of drug offenses, or poverty and homelessness can largely be criminalized because of their exposure or these unwanted behaviors that we've deemed criminal. So criminality in a broad sense is kind of crime as it's occurring, but it also is very much kind of an exercise in how we define unwanted behavior. And when I've seen that at the public defender's office, I've just noticed that some aspects or segments of our population kind of find themselves to be more criminalized and then have kind of a disproportionate perception of criminality among them, if that makes sense.
No, that definitely makes sense. And speaking of making sense, I also wanted to kind of transition now to talking about what exactly a judge does, because I know that, for me personally, every time that I go to vote in an election, it feels as though whenever it comes down to voting for a judge, that is always the, race that I know the least about. And learning about these candidates has always been tricky in the past, which is another reason why I wanted to have you come on today to talk about this. Could you just briefly explain for those of us who might be unaware, like what does a judge do besides just hear cases? Like what exactly is the day-to-day life of a judge looking like in the city?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a great question because I think a lot of people don't know, especially in these lower courts. And so municipal court, for those that don't know, is the predominant caseload is misdemeanors that occur within city limits. Misdemeanors are crimes that are punishable by a year or up to a year in jail. And so a significant percentage, the majority of cases that are heard by municipal court, just so people understand what court we're talking about, are either non-DUI traffic offenses or crimes that are kind of associated with people experiencing homelessness, poverty, addiction, and mental illness. So they're kind of derivative of those kind of social circumstances. So what judges do is they hear, of course, all of those individual cases, and they hear the merits of the case. They rule on motions, they do that. But they also make really important decisions on those cases that have a lot of discretion baked into them, such as determining how much bond a person is going to be held on, if they're going to be held pre-trial in detention. And that, of course, has monumental impacts on folks, because I know experience, well, from being a public defender, that it's much harder to proceed with a case when you're in custody than not. So that's a monumental decision that happens right off the bat. Similarly, sentencing is another thing that judges wield a significant amount of discretion on. So they decide what sentences are actually imposed to people. But even beyond that kind of like nuts and bolts of the daily case-to-case thing is that judges actually have also a large bit of discretion in kind of setting their own policy and court culture and how they choose to deal with the offenses and the defendants that are brought before them. So for instance, they can start to implement their own kind of sentencing policies or sentencing practices that kind of reflect their perspective. They can also create diversionary courts, which we see many judges do, as they focus on kind of courts that treat cases differently. So they kind of create alternative ways to deal with crime aside from kind of the traditional way. So that can be a very big part of it. They can also kind of shape broader policy because they manage court staff. So for instance, they can make the decision of whether or not they want to include case managers or social workers in their staff, which inherently changes how they deal with the cases and kind of how that court culture exists. They can also, they issue warrants and they decide what those warrants look like or how much they're for. So they also have a way of indirectly impacting policing practices because those warrants are in the hands of police and they're the ones who issue them and serve them. So what judges beyond just the day-to-day, they also largely set policy and culture, especially in these courts of limited jurisdiction like Missoula Municipal Court, because you're setting a city court culture, which is a pretty big role. And even bigger than that, judges work together on broader policy all the time. They do that in Missoula. For instance, the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council is a large grant-funded initiative being basically overseen by Judge Leslie Halligan. And it's a bunch of grant funding that's paying to try and decrease jail populations. And so in that program, different judges from different jurisdictions meet to try and coordinate ways that they can decrease jail population. So even at a larger macro level, judges also engage in kind of larger criminal justice policy. So they kind of have a way of interacting with the criminal justice system at its very basic level on a case-by-case basis, all the way up to kind of helping and contributing to larger policy decisions.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for taking the time to explain all that to us. And I kind of want to have that transition now to our final question, which is, what are the current issues that you are seeing with the court as currently constructed? And what would you do exactly to change it? And then also alongside of that, why should people vote for you in this election?
Yeah, so I mean, what I've seen, and this is based on my experiences in the court and my experiences working in the public defender's office, where I've worked with a lot of folks who practice in municipal court. I've seen a lot of how they have done business. And this does not just include Judge Jenks, but it also includes the people, specifically the person that I'm running against and some of the other people who have been running in or have been working as judges in her court. The things that I've seen in that court is it's had a quite heavy-handed criminalization approach to crimes that I think can't be punished away. So a lot of times when you're talking about punishment, such as jail sentences or fines, it's rooted in this perception that crime is a rational decision that can be made and that you need to alter the decision-making process by having some kind of negative outcome such as punishment. Those penological policies don't work as well when crime or criminality is not rooted in rational choice, but perhaps something like poverty or mental illness or addiction. And so I've largely felt working in that court and continuing to observe it from the sidelines since I've left that court is that they've oftentimes dealt with these crimes in a way as if they could be punished away when I don't believe that they can. By way of example, my opponent has sentenced people to 10 days in jail for a second or third no insurance ticket for not having insurance on their car. And, I can't think of a more dramatic example of a crime of poverty that cannot be solved by long-term jail sentences. And so what we've seen from this court that I find unsettling is a reliance on incarceration and a reliance on fines as a way to kind of meet their penological goals of trying to address these crimes. And I don't think that that's ever going to get to where they want it to get. And I also think it's a tremendous economic burden for taxpayers because it costs $140 some a day to hold people in jail. But it also has this human cost of actually aggravating what I believe are likely to cause people. It aggravates the factors that I believe perhaps lead people to misdemeanor criminality, which is things like destabilization, mental health destabilization. I mean, a myriad of things happen when people are incarcerated for short periods of time. So I want to take the court in a different direction. I want to try and work on ways that we can be more holistic and focus on people's social circumstance and recognize that that's a cause that drives criminality, and do things like incorporate case managers into the courtroom that I believe that we can get from the university, and have practicum students who are integrated into the courtroom who actually use the court as a tool to help people reintegrate into services that they were already seeking. I think that's a way that you can use the court as kind of a net benefit to the community rather than just a mechanism of punishment. I think there's a handful of other examples. I'm running, like I said, kind of alongside Jennifer Striano. She's very driven by the criminalization of traffic offenses as well. Montana is one of only a handful of states that even criminalizes traffic offenses. I think it's 12 or 13. And one thing that Jennifer's passionate about, and that I know I support her in, is implementing what we call it, or we're calling it traffic court. But it's essentially taking some of these regulatory traffic offenses and moving them off of the traditional criminal justice docket, where we don't need to be setting them for jury trials. We should be helping folks get in compliance with those, making sure they get insurance on their cars, making sure they're making tangible steps towards getting license reinstated. So those kind of things, the court actually helping people to address the underlying causes of the criminality. So I think that kind of globally is where I would like to take it. I think that another person I'm running with, Eli Parker, is really a benefit for that because of his integration in the mental health community. I think in Missoula, as we continue to see housing prices rise and dramatically outpace the increase of wages, that we can continue to expect that people will continue to experience homelessness in our community. And probably the people who experience it most disproportionately are folks with mental health issues. So we also want to have a court that recognizes that and takes the steps to integrate people into mental health services rather than just kind of treating them as every other defendant that you can just punish for a couple of days and then be done with it. So I think that globally, we just want to move in a different direction that actually recognizes the reality of most of these criminal offenses. Now, I'll say that there's a caveat of the DUIs and kind of violent misdemeanors are different, because I just think that the motivations behind those crimes differ, and those actually present some public safety risks. So I think that there's that we're not like taking jail off the table for every single person and letting everyone go free, but we're talking about making a more judicious, more evidence-based approach to how the bench operates, which I think is going to basically better serve, Missoulians. And I think it's more in line with how I think Missoula as a community views itself in terms of like its ethos and worldview. And I think it's more in line with, just like I say, informed criminal justice policy. And so, to kind of wrap that up in terms of why I think people should vote for me and why I think they should also vote for Jennifer and Eli, is because that we have this shared goal of making the court better. And that's what our objective is. None of us are in this because we are power hungry or just seeking office to seek office. We're doing this because we see it as an opportunity to fix the court. And the reason we've decided to kind of run as a team is because we believe we have these different strengths that, if utilized, can kind of be like three central pillars of what should be a really good municipal court system. Jen's experience and legal knowledge, Eli's integration in the mental health system, and my academic legal background and connections at the university. I think that we can utilize all of those things to really make a court that's better for Missoula. And I think that our opponents largely are the people who have been doing it. And I think that Missoulians have a really interesting choice this election, because they can choose to continue to do things the way that they have been done, or they can choose a new way of looking at misdemeanor and municipal court. And I think that we really are the better option for that reason.
I really appreciate you taking the time to explain all of that. You, like, your positions on how you think the court should be, where it currently is, why people should vote for you. I definitely do believe that from what you're saying here, the court probably should be taken in a different direction. So thank you again for taking the time to come on and talk to us about it. For those who are interested in following along with your campaign and the campaigns of your other two members of your team, I guess you'd like to call them. I call it a slate team, same thing.
Yeah.
Where can people learn more about you guys?
So they can learn more about us on our websites. Mine is CoolidgeForJudge21.com. Jennifer's is MissouliansForStriano.com, and Eli's is MissouliansForParker.com. We reference each other on our website. So if you find any of those, you should be able to find information about us and what we're trying to accomplish, and each of us individually.
Okay, perfect. So I'll definitely have some links for everyone in the episode description. So go ahead and go into the description now. You should see some links for those candidates. Jacob, thank you again for coming on to the podcast today. I really do appreciate it. And good luck in your election.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate the time.
All right. And for everyone else, we'll see you in the next episode. Take care.